All right, people, if you're coming in, get into this chat and say hello. Actually, let me
It
make
says
sure.
there's 2 in the audience.
Okay. And I've got to make sure I get the right chat in here. Thanks for joining
That's
us.
right.
We are
Chat.
message to all participants. Here we go. Live stream chat. So yeah, let us know if you're here, where you're from. We're just going to wait a minute or so for people to log on.
I'm gonna send a note. There we go. Hi. It's just
There
weird
you
how it
are.
works. Yeah, I wonder if anybody will come since it was so last minute. I had a few people like, how did I not know about this before?
Well, good news for people who are here or not here. You're going to get this recording. We are going to keep it
Yes.
live on YouTube from our first Outdoor Athlete Concussion Lounge, and then this is number 2. So, hi, Shiggy.
Hey,
Good to see
Shiggy.
you. Thanks for being here. We're
Yeah.
just going to kind of wait a couple minutes, I think, and then we'll do our intros and we'll get right to it because we have a lot of great questions since we didn't get them covered all last time, which I think is great. It just kind of reinforces the fact that people need help and people are struggling. And so I think once we kick it off, we'll give you guys a little bit of background on why we're doing this, why we started it, and what the deal is. It's 6:01, so I think we'll wait just one more minute. If
Okay.
you were here before and we didn't get to your question, hopefully we'll get to it this time. But yeah, we will hopefully just keep answering stuff and keep providing resources for people. Hi, Kiki. Nice to see you. I'm glad you felt less alone after our last lounge. I feel you because when I started
Mhm.
meeting my concussion buddies, my brain buddies, I just started a support network and a group of like, okay, I'm not alone.
I'm not
So
crazy. Other people have gone through this. Yeah,
there's definitely
definitely. Glad you're
in
here.
knowing that other people, it's not great to know other people are suffering or struggling or going through it, but it's reassurance that like you're not alone and that there are
Hmm.
resources. So I think
Hmm.
we'll kick it off here. So I'm Rebecca Rusch. Welcome everyone. And this is Outdoor Athlete Concussion Lounge number 2, which is the brainchild of Dr. Eliza Sampey. We call her Liz, who has become a concussion specialist after her experience with multiple concussions, my experience with one that really was quite devastating. And so we knew each other in the outdoor athlete bikepacking world, but we really came together in both of our concussion recoveries. And um, Dr. Liz has been amazing in actually helping me navigate my journey. And she has went to school for a year on concussion rehab research because she was so frustrated with not getting the help that she needed. And so she's actually created a business model and resources to help people navigate and mentor their care. My experience was similar in that I wanted to provide resources for people too who had concussions. And so I've done a podcast series called Brainstorm with Celine Yeager and provided some resources there. Dr. Liz has a free ebook on her website, a free concussion ebook. So we've both got a lot of free resources for you, as well as these Q&A lounges that we just wanted to host to sort of more specifically answer your questions. I am not a doctor. I am not an expert in concussion, but as most of us are experiencing, if you've gone through it or a loved one has, you have to start educating yourself because the healthcare system just isn't that great in helping people navigate the multifaceted recovery aspect of a concussion. It's not that simple, and so that is, I'll let Liz talk about herself a little bit, but that is the work that she's in now and in her practice. And my work is really just using my voice to educate people and encourage them and help them get more help as I continue my healing journey. We're both still on our healing journey. So I'll let you know it's a process, but the good news is there, there are therapies and individual attention based on your symptoms and what you're going through. So that's a little bit of what we'll go through in the questions tonight. We won't get to them all. We still have a really long list. And so I just will say, don't fear. If you didn't watch the first Concussion Lounge questions, what we find is there's a lot of themes. And so you may not have asked a question, but a question you didn't even know you had might be answered in the first session or in this session. And eventually we'll get to all the questions and we'll do our best. But we will point you to the resources that are free on both Liz's website and on my website. And then I also last week just launched an episode of What's the Rush podcast where I talked to Haley Batten, who's silver medalist in the Olympics, mountain biker, young, amazing athlete, world-class athlete. She's had multiple concussions. And we specifically talk about that in last week's episode. So that's another free resource to go consume and hear about what she's learned. And it's actually pretty impressive of her. She's had 3 really big ones and what she learned from 1 to 2 to 3. And she's back racing now. And now she knows the signs and symptoms and knows when to step off the course. So it's a really cool, that was a great episode to like hear of somebody's learning and progression,
Mm-hmm.
who's competing at the highest level. So Dr. Liz, anything else you want to add in our intro before we start getting into the questions?
I don't think so. I did just listen to that episode with Haley, and that was awesome. Like, even just like your intro of the episode made me tear up. I was like, oh, I loved it. And there's a there's a couple things I do want to say about that that is probably very specific to her situation that other people might not
Mm-hmm.
experience in the excuse me in the same way. So I do want to touch on that a little bit. And I hope my voice doesn't die. I just went for a run, and now apparently I have allergies. So yeah, but yeah, I think you covered it. So I think we should get moving.
Awesome. Well, we want to go back because in one of the first questions we answer or talked about, Liz, you felt like we didn't totally get to it. And was that about return to play and return to
Yeah,
exercise?
return to sport. There were I forget who asked it, but whoever asked it asked a number of questions that we went over, and that was the thing that we did not touch on.
Okay.
And yeah, it was just I'm not finding it right now, but it was something just based on like how do you know when to return to sport. So we'll kind of talk about that, and that actually goes into exact like perfectly what I wanted to talk about with Haley's experience. And so like how you know when it's safe to return to sport when it depends on like what type of athlete you are, right? So if you're a cyclist, if you're a skier, if you're, if you're a kayaker, if you're doing an outdoor sport where hitting your head is likely, it is playing with fire to get back on the bike within that 4-week window before the brain is healed. So research has shown that it takes between 21 and 44 days for the actual brain to heal after a concussion. And if you hit your head again within that window, your brain has not reached full metabolic recovery. And so your brain is still in a really massive energy deficit. And so if you hit your head again within that time, even if your symptoms are gone, if you hit your head again within that time, it's going to be really bad. You could risk actually death with something called second impact syndrome, which is when you hit your head and your brain is still not healed from the first concussion, that can actually kill you. Now that's rare, but it is possible. So, you got to decide if it's worth the risk for you. And if it doesn't kill you, it's going to really prolong your recovery because then your brain's energy stores are even less than they are initially. So if they're initially here, you hit your head and they go down to here, and they're slowly coming back up over 3 to 6 weeks, and then you hit your head again and then they plummet, right? And so for people in Haley Batten's situation who are, trying to make the Olympic team, trying to train for the Olympics, like, I know that one of the concussions that she talked about, she was off the bike for 5 weeks, and that's a sufficient amount of time. But then there were a couple of them that she talked about where she said that she was able to return within a week or so because her symptoms went away. That's great that your symptoms go away, but that doesn't actually mean your brain is healed. So, someone like Haley who has a lot on the line and is, playing the game at that level, and, that's her job, she's at the highest level of the sport, she's maybe going to take that risk when she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have symptoms anymore. But, for people that aren't playing the sport at that level, like trying to make the Olympics, trying to, you know, be at the, win the overall World Cup, probably not a good idea to try to return to cycling, and especially not to racing inside of that 4-week window, because the risks of a crash are just too high. So
Yeah.
just wanted
Yeah.
to touch on that a little
I
bit.
think that's a good point too. And returning to movement or exercise, which is very therapeutic. This was the mistake
Mm-hmm.
I made. I just was too scared to do anything. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and not because I wasn't going to, not because of falling, just because I was eliciting different symptoms. And so there was a lot of fear built into that. But, and so I didn't move. I waited too
Mm-hmm.
long to move. And
Right.
so, yeah, you don't want to hit your head again, but movement and activity is obviously, or as we're learning, is actually part of the healing process of the brain.
Exactly. Yeah. So like when we say return to sport, like doesn't mean like it doesn't mean you have to wait 4 weeks to return to anything, right? Like movement is good. Ride your bike on the trainer, go for a walk, go for a jog. Like you really, so after that first 48 hours, which, and Haley spoke to this on the podcast too, like that first 48 hours is really critical. So that's the window where you want to be in what's called relative rest. That doesn't mean lay in a dark room and do nothing. That means, rest. Don't do anything that exacerbates your symptoms, because your brain is really trying to replenish those energy stores in that critical first period. But then after the first 48 hours, it is important to start moving again. So, movement increases the blood flow, it decreases inflammation, it helps with brain healing, all of that good stuff. And, when you want to return to other types of sport that don't have such a risk of hitting your head, when you're at the point where exercise is not increasing your symptoms significantly, that's a good time to, start returning to that. And it's okay to have a little bit of a symptom increase, like in order to increase our thresholds, we have to dip into that a little bit, but you don't want to go, blowing yourself out of the water, which is what I did. I returned way too early, and I didn't get back on the bike inside of 4 weeks, but I was on the trainer doing like really hard intense workouts, and that was not a good idea. That prolonged my recovery, and here I am 4.5 years later, and a lot of it was due to that. So, like,
Funny, we did the opposite. Yeah.
yeah, and they're both bad.
And somewhere in the middle would have been the right,
Exactly.
as we know. But
Yeah, yeah.
let's get to some of these other questions. This is kind of related because this was part of my recovery struggle too, and it continues to be a little bit. From Margot Sharapova, what is your opinion on screen time's impact on rate of recovery, even when you feel you're physically tolerating screen time? So talk about screen time and eyes and like that sort of brain fatigue, which is one of my big symptom areas. Yeah,
Hmm.
talk about screens.
Yeah, that was a big issue for me as well. Research has shown that in the first 48 hours, limiting screen time will enhance recovery and will help recovery happen more quickly. And that's symptom recovery. That's not actual brain recovery. Limiting, especially in that first 48 hours. And then after that first 48 hours, kind of the guideline is to go back to screens gradually and not completely avoid them, but not be on them for so long that you're putting yourself into symptom overload. So we don't want to completely avoid screens. Otherwise, again, our brain's never going to get used to it. But there are a number of issues with screens, right? There's like the flickering that happens with the screen. There's the blue light, which is not a bad thing unless it's after dark, right? And so after dark, if we're trying to be on screens, and this is anybody, but enhanced if you've had a concussion, that's going to mess with our brain's hormone production, especially melatonin. And sleep is often disrupted after a concussion. And so if we're on screens after dark, that's going to help disrupt our sleep even more, right?
Yeah.
And so for those of us that have any persisting symptoms with vision and screens, one of the things is called visual motion sensitivity, and it's exactly how it sounds, right? Like we're sensitive to motion because of our visual system. That was a big one for me. So last summer, after I got my concussion in April, I do virtual physical therapy and performance, right? So the person on the other end of the screen is moving all over the place, and meanwhile I feel like I'm going to vomit. And so part of the recovery for that is specific visual therapy exercises that can help your brain relearn how to interpret motion. And then part of it is graded exposure therapy, where you let yourself be on the screen and become symptomatic a little bit. So maybe like an increase of like 2 points from baseline, and then you back off and you take a break, right? You're not just pushing through so that everything overloads. You push a little bit, then you back off and take a break. Then you come back, then you back off and take a break.
Yeah, that's something I'm learning from you on any symptoms is what you call taking a brain break.
Mm-hmm.
And you take 10-minute brain breaks throughout the day because you've learned. your symptoms, you've learned where your overload point is, and so
Mm-hmm.
you've got them scheduled. I think for you, it's like 3 clients, and then you need to take a
Mm-hmm.
brain break.
Yeah.
And I've really started implementing that since I started working with you, of like, instead of pushing through and like, no, I'll just finish these and then I'll just be done for the day. I'll finish all my
Mm-hmm.
emails and all my work on the computer, then I'll just be done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking brain breaks, and all that is literally stopping the stimulation, closing your eyes, laying down, putting an eye mask on, maybe you're meditating or whatever, but it's stopping the stimulation of that's all coming in from all different, whether it's sound, movement, eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and those brain breaks have been really great. So I thank you for that. I've taken those brain breaks. And I think this
Good.
is cool about learning to manage your own recovery. Once you start to learn, and I know Travis is on here too, he's one of my brain buddies too. You start to learn what your symptoms are, and then you start to learn how to, like, ooh, I feel them. Okay, so you do start to learn some self-care, but it takes some education to get to that point. And again, I'll point
Mm-hmm.
to that ebook, the free ebook that you have for that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the screen, and you said it already too, but like, screens are not good for a healthy brain necessarily. The amount of
Yeah.
screens we have in our life and in our lives, and the amount of digital input that we have is actually really hard on everybody. So it
Mm-hmm.
might be something to implement with your family and with everyone to sort of turn things off. It's good
Mm-hmm.
for everyone's brain, concussion or not.
Yeah. I want to quick, I saw Travis's comment. I want to speak to this real quick, the Buffalo concussion treadmill test. So this is something that we as clinicians use for a couple different things. So we use it initially. This is not the first thing I do with every client, but probably the second thing I do with every client. And the Buffalo concussion treadmill test is an exercise tolerance test. And you can do it on a treadmill or on the bike. Most of the time I'm doing it on a bike because most of my clients have, stationary bikes or bike trainers. And the basic description is there's a protocol for it. You increase your heart rate little by little by little by little by little, and at the point where you start to get symptoms during that test, you back it off, and that is the heart rate level at which you're going to start your graded exercise protocol at. Okay, so that's what the Buffalo concussion treadmill test is. Now, conventional concussion protocol says that when you pass the Buffalo concussion treadmill test or bike test, which means that you can get all the way through the test up to your max heart rate and you don't get any symptoms, you are cleared to return to sport. Now, this was developed for team sports athletes. This was not developed for endurance or ultra endurance athletes. And unfortunately, it is woefully inadequate for endurance athletes. It is a good place to start, but you know, going from like 0 up to your max heart rate in a quote unquote workout over 20 minutes, that is not even close to what endurance athletes do when they quote unquote return to sport. And so that's a starting point. But what happens a lot with endurance athletes is they pass the test, they return to endurance level training, endurance level sport, and their autonomic nervous system actually isn't recovered enough to do that. And so that's a big thing that messed me up in my initial recovery, was that I got to the point where I could hit my max heart rate and not experience any symptoms. And so I thought it was fine to return to training that was like 7 to 10 hours long and return to ultra endurance racing where I was racing for 3 or 4 days at a time. And my autonomic nervous system was not able to handle that. And so the Buffalo test is a really good place to start, but if you're an endurance athlete, you need to go deeper. And working with a concussion specialist that specializes in endurance athletes, a subspecialist, that can definitely help. But that's something that I'm going to put out some literature on pretty soon, because I think that that is a really common. I'm seeing this in a lot of my clients where they pass the Buffalo test, but they're not actually ready to return to sport at the level that they're training, competing, indulging in, even recreationally. So,
Yeah, I mean, I want
yeah.
to pop down to Kiki's question, Kiki Jarvis, because it's kind of similar to this. So I'll read this question um, because everyone has a different baseline of like,
Mm-hmm.
what is their level, a normal level. So it says, as athletes, how do we navigate the landscape of the world looking at us exercising at what they consider a high level? So therefore, they think we aren't truly experiencing persistent concussion symptoms. Meanwhile, we're struggling with going to the grocery store, having conversations, or focusing on a recipe to make dinner. And so this person, it sounds like Kiki is like, can exercise and return to a certain level, but still other, other life skills and other things are still overloading the brain. So it makes me think of, Liz, you talked about it in our first concussion session, how, and I learned from you in my intake with you, is the 7 different areas of concussion symptoms and where they can come from, whether it's the neck, whether it's the eyes, and they've got all fancy names to remember. But it sounds like with Kiki, in one area she was doing great, but in other areas, you talked about you did my assessment and recovery. You're like, okay, you're good in these areas. You're not eliciting high symptoms, but in these other 2 areas, that's where we need to start and focus. And so
Mhm.
it kind of makes me think about how the Buffalo test may not be exactly the right clearing because it's only
Mhm.
clearing one thing, or you're
Mhm.
exercising and feeling okay, but you
Mhm.
still have symptoms in other areas.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. And especially with outdoor athletes, like we can ride if we can ride on the trainer, like that's great, but that's just a starting point. Like think about all the things that are happening when you ride a mountain bike, right? Or you're skiing downhill, like so much visual input, and you're moving your neck and you're moving your head, and a lot of cognitive input, a lot of like mental emotional output, right? And so, you're exactly right. Like you might be fine with exercise on a treadmill or a bike trainer, but then you get out on the trail where there's all of this visual input and vestibular input and input from your neck, and all of a sudden your brain goes haywire. And
Yeah,
so
I know
yeah, that's
Travis has had that experience, and Travis just sent me a text today. It was like, I went on my first mountain bike ride. I was so stoked. And he's been
yay.
actually, but he was nervous to get back on the bike because
Hmm.
all the movement. And even, when he first started trail running, he's a trail runner, it was like, oh, nervous about his balance, but
Hmm.
he's
Yeah.
worked through those. And so, congratulations, Trav, you got back on a mountain bike today. Made me very
Yeah, that's
happy.
amazing. That makes me very happy too, even though I don't know you. But yeah, it's a progression. It's like trainer, and then it's like a road that is not full of cars, like when I got back on my bike after my concussion in April, after being on the trainer, I went on there's a bike path, that just like goes through the woods, and you start there, and then you get on to easy single track, and then you get on to harder single, it's like, and it's some of this is common sense, right? Like we don't think about it unless we think about it. But if most of us think about it, like, okay, I need an easy progression from the trainer to the trail, what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
So,
hard to accept too sometimes when you're a high level athlete. You don't want to go back to baby steps. But I
yeah.
commend Travis for doing that because it's
Hmm.
paying off.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, you really have to. And I think, yeah, I'm looking at Kiki's thing too. Yeah, like, navigating the landscape of the world. Like, oh, it's so hard. I mean, I think, you can't explain things to the world, but, explaining things to the people close to you, like just like Rebecca said, like there are a lot of aspects of concussion, right? Like, if you're struggling with going to the grocery store, like that's a lot of visual input. That's a lot of lights and sounds, like those things are different than exercising. And so maybe just trying to explain all of the different aspects of concussion, which you can read about in my ebook. I don't want to go through that now, but explain all of that to your loved ones, that there are so many different aspects of concussion that are not even real. I mean, not that they're not related, but they're totally different, separate than exercise.
Yeah, and Kiki, to your point, how do you let people around you kind of know? It's no secret now that I hid my concussion for like a year and a half, and even from people close to me, and finally I started having some real honest conversations with my business partner and my husband and my best friend, and they were all like, yeah, we noticed this. And my coach too was actually really great. I had to ask him, like, what do you see in me, because this is what I feel like when I, like, my coach loves to, he'd do screen share a lot, and he's flipping through his screen really fast all the time and all these spreadsheets. And I had to just tell him, I can't. And we used to do that all the time. And I loved it. And I had to say, I can't, that really hurts my head. Can you stop moving your cursor? And
Hmm.
I had to come out because they don't know. And that's what we used to do before. And so I had to really say, that really hurts my head. I can't concentrate when you do. Or with my business partner, I had to say, I need an agenda for meetings ahead of time and with like 5 things on it, and that's it. And so I had to put some structure in there because I was suffering and they didn't really know what to do. And so I had to tell the people around me, it's really hard for me to go to the grocery store without a list. So I had to say to my husband, I'll go, but help me make a list.
Mhm.
And so, kind of to your point, Kiki, of helping the people around you navigate it, one, it's a relief for you because once I said, this is hard for me, then they're like, oh, okay, I can help with that. And then my friends and my coach and a couple people really close to me were also a subjective measure of, I went to visit my friend Donna a year later and I asked her, like, how am I doing? And because I don't know. And she's like, you are moving your neck so much better than the last time I saw you. And I was like, oh, cool. And so I
Mhm.
think having those personal check-ins with people, it helps you. And then it's motivating to see progress that you may not see every day because you're like, oh my God, I've been doing these neck exercises and blah, blah, blah. So I do think you got to let people in and you got to be really honest, people you feel safe with, and ask them for little check-ins. I actually have my coach like write up like where I was and I went back and looked at that. If you journal, that's another great. Go back and look at what you wrote and where you
Mhm.
are now. Because it feels like a slow progress and sometimes it feel like nothing is happening. And I think that's what's great about the kind of work that you're doing now, Liz, is you score people every time you meet with them and you score your symptoms. And so you can see like, oh, those are a little worse, those are a little better, those are, um,
Mhm.
but yeah, navigating the landscape of the world around you, it kind of takes some honesty from you to like say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I need, or I don't know what I need.
Mhm.
Um, but this is what I'm feeling. And
Yeah.
I would lose my temper at my husband, and I never have done that. And he just didn't know what to do. And when I
Mhm.
said, I guess this is a symptom of concussion, is that I become a real asshole sometimes. And then he could be more patient with me.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question, but yeah, I
Mhm.
appreciate you asking how to navigate it. That's really what this is all about, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll kind of speak to the opposite perspective on that actually. Like I talked about my concussion a lot and
Mhm.
I wasn't always met with support from my
Yeah,
friends.
okay.
And I have a client right now who's going through that. Her friends think she should be better by now, and they are like, "Why can't you come on this like 5 day bike ride and all this stuff?" And for me, like I had to learn how to advocate for myself in a huge way. I had to learn how to set boundaries. Like, my friends that when I, about a year out of my concussion, I felt like I was finally healthy enough to like go visit some of my friends. And I could ride my bike again, but I had very strict parameters around when I could ride my bike. Like I had really bad insomnia at that time. And so there were nights when I wouldn't fall asleep until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then I would try to sleep till, maybe 6 or 7. And so I couldn't ride super early in the morning. And I also couldn't ride super late in the evening. And so I had a very tight window. And, I had some friends that were really frustrated with me about that and they didn't understand. And, also cognitively, I was really impaired. And what I didn't realize at the time was that my cognitive symptoms were due to the fact that I was doing way too much physically. And that's very typical of cognitive symptoms. Like they can be due to the fact that you are overloading your brain physically in some way, and cognition and emotion are going to be the first things to go because the physical body has to, like, that's what keeps us alive, right? And so our brain is going to keep this going as long as possible, and our cognition and our emotions are going to slip. And so, cognitively, it would take me 2 hours to get ready to go for a simple bike ride. And my friends could not understand why that was happening, and they'd get annoyed with me and frustrated with me, and like, "Oh, your concussion was a year ago. Are you sure that you're still, and that was really tough for me. And so some of those friends I ended up having to take a step back from during that time. And some of those friends, as I started to learn more, I would hand them papers and be like, hey, read this research paper. Like, this shit is real. I'm not making this up. So,
Yeah.
kind of like depending on your relationship with the person, maybe it takes a step back, maybe it takes an honest conversation, maybe it takes handing somebody, telling someone to listen to Brainstorm or handing them my ebook and being like, look, like this thing is real. So yeah,
My
it can be
I mean,
tough.
yeah, Brainstorm was like where my family and basically heard my real story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, and it's interesting. I wouldn't say I've lost friends through this, but I've had some relationships change. uh,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm injured and I'm going through some stuff. But I've also had some relationships flourish, like my friendship with Travis and
Mm-hmm.
some other concussion buddies. Um, I
Mm-hmm.
love what you said about how emotion is often one of the first things to signal to us that we are overloading our brains. Because there's a question that is on here from Lee Donovan, one of my mentors, amazing, amazing mountain bike woman, one of my
Yep.
heroes.
One of my heroes too.
Yeah, and she question is, I've experienced multiple head injuries in my life. I'm 53, and I've noticed when I'm under stress, my brain seems to shut down. I struggle to think clearly, I get easily overwhelmed, and sometimes lash out at my loved ones. It's something I've worked on, but still happens. It's frustrating and embarrassing. I worry I might have CTE or another long-term effect brain trauma. How can someone in my situation get tested or find support, and what strategies to manage these kind of stress induced cognitive shutdowns?
Hmm.
That's a
Yeah.
lot.
So
I'm sorry you're going through that, but I'm really glad
yeah.
you asked this question.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's really tough. So emotion and cognition are definitely very common side effects of a concussion. It can definitely be amplified if you've had several. When I had mine, my big one, that was my fourth. I've now had six. And what I would say, so when you're under stress, your brain seems to shut down. Like that, that's really the key there. So the key for you and for anybody else experiencing this is to try to effectively manage stress. And by stress, I mean all sorts of stress, right? So, like physical exercise is stress, like cognitive workload at your job, like that's stress, emotional situations with your family or friends or coworker, like that's stress. Anything like visual system stuff, like that is stress. If you're having visual issues with the concussion and you're in an environment where you're having a lot of visual input, like that is stress on your brain. And so thinking about the different types of stress that you have and trying to mitigate that will be really helpful for that. So that's kind of the first piece, is trying to reduce stress. We can talk about journaling, meditation, breathing, all of those things are really good to manage stress. The brain breaks for sure. Like I will definitely have times where I'm feeling, I mean, still, it's like I'm doing a lot right now in my life. I'm doing a lot of work. I'm trying to figure out how much I can ride my bike again, and so like I will have times when I will feel either my cognition or my emotional state start to slip. And now, because I know this so well, I can say, oh, brain break, and I will remove myself from the situation and I will take a 10-minute brain break. And usually that will bring me back down. And one of the things that I have learned, actually a long time ago, this is way before my concussion or all of this stuff, is to recognize when you're in what I like to call the red zone. Okay. So like the kind of the psychological zones, like green zone is like, peaceful and calm and happy, maybe excited, like you're not feeling any of that stress. And then red zone, if you think about like a pyramid, green zone's down here. And then we have yellow zone, which is kind of the middle. And red zone is like emergency, right? Red light, like you are getting, like you're shutting down or you're about to boil, think of a thermometer where the red is going up and up and up and about to burst out the top. Like that's red zone. And so learning to track your body's signals to know when you're in the red zone, and that can be emotional signals like feeling anxious or feeling upset, feeling angry. That can be like mental or thought signals like you know my partner is out to get me, everybody hates me, those types of thoughts. It can be physical signals like your heart starts beating faster, maybe your skin gets flushed, right? Like all of those signs are symptoms that you are getting very activated into what I call the red zone. And if you can catch that, then you can take a step back and you can say, oh my gosh, I'm in the red zone. I need to not I can't believe anything I think. I should not say anything. I should not have any, discussions. I just need to remove myself from the situation, take some deep breaths, go for a walk, call a friend and vent, whatever it is to get yourself out of the red zone. And for me, like even in my life before the concussion, that was so helpful to just be able to recognize when I was starting to creep into the red or get into the red. And that saved me so many heartaches and fights and probably getting fired and, all these bad things. So, mitigating stress and then learning to recognize the red zone when it comes and taking that pause and saying, oh, I really don't want to act on this right now. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to leave the room, whatever that is. Like those are kind of the two key like management strategies that I like to use. You have
Mhm.
any you want to play on that?
I mean, it makes me think about, I mean, these are all athletes here. And so it makes me think about, endurance zone where green zone, you could go all day. You're fine.
Mm-hmm.
You're out with your friends, you're on a social ride. The yellow zone where, you can sustain it for a while, it's a little harder, but like you can't stay there all day. You can stay there, whatever. And then the red zone is your anaerobic where literally you can touch that, but you can't stay there. You might sprint to the top of a hill, but then you gotta come back down.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we put it in sort of athlete terminology,
Yeah, that's
um,
perfect.
don't stay in the red zone and you know it's coming. You know exactly what it's feeling like. You start to feel that boil and then you do need to remove yourself or you are going to blow
Mm-hmm.
literally
Yeah.
like a volcano. And for Lee, it sounds like she's understanding it and she's understanding the symptoms, but she's still working on managing how to bring that stress level back down. And the second part of it is she's worried she might have some long-term issues going on, and that means she needs to come get some care and get her
Mm-hmm.
symptoms evaluated and see if there still is something that is unaddressed from
Yeah.
years, and she's been sort of managing okay, and it's reaching a boiling point. So I suspect she may have other areas of those 7 areas of symptoms
Mm-hmm.
that still could use some attention and some therapy to keep her from hitting that red zone so often.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I completely agree. And it's like the symptom management is one piece that's very important, but then also like, why is this happening? Like, what's going on in your brain? What is your brain having a hard time processing that's making your trigger ceiling come so far down? Oh, and so that could be your visual system. If your brain is working really hard to process vision, it's not going to be able to manage emotions as well. That could be your neck. Like your neck is really intricately tied to your vision and your brain function. That could be your vestibular system. If you're not quite sure where your head is in space, that can influence. If you're overdoing it physically, that can influence. And so, yeah, getting some help and figuring out like, do you still have aspects of these brain injuries that could be treated? And likely you do. And even, we spoke to this last time, but even years after a concussion or a TBI of any type, you can still be treated and make massive progress. And so I would definitely recommend getting help. A neuropsychologist evaluation might be helpful in this situation. That can help with kind of that specific issue, but I would speculate that there are some of these other systems that are dysfunctional that are making your brain have to work harder than it needs to.
Yeah, and it's sort of like when you're not injured or even when you're younger, oftentimes you think about like you can go all night and party and get up the next morning and go on a run.
Mm-hmm.
Can't it's not sustainable as you get older, or if you have a kind of a lingering neck thing or you have something, you can manage it and get through and push through to a point until your body is just kind of like, no, you need to deal with this issue that you've been, sort of putting
Mm-hmm.
on for a while.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so I want to shift to there are quite a few questions about sleep, which I think we
Mm-hmm.
all know sleep is our superpower. It's our magic drug. Um, and somebody asked specifically, so maybe we'll touch on sleep and the importance and sleep hygiene, but somebody also asked specifically about what can they take for insomnia, and they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about taking some sort of supplement or medication. So, do you want to talk a little bit about
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sleep is everything. I unfortunately learned that the hard way after my concussion. I had chronic insomnia for 3 years, and it absolutely wrecked every aspect of my life. It was the worst for the first year and a half, but then, truly, like, even the fall of 2023, I couldn't sleep more than like 0 to 3 hours a night for over a month. Like, I would go in waves. And so, sleep is so important. In terms of like medication and supplementation. I think the person that specifically asked this question, if I'm remembering this correctly, had a subdural hemorrhage or subarachnoid hemorrhage.
Says
Um,
arachnoid. Yeah.
yeah, so that is something that is not a concussion. That's more than a concussion. And so with that, you need to talk to somebody who is familiar with that condition and can prescribe, if you want to try medication, prescribe a medication that is in, you know, like they know that you've had that brain bleed, because that can change the game a little bit. Um, that being said, for anybody, sleep medication prescription is the absolute last thing I would recommend. Like, it does not actually like help you get good sleep. It sedates you like you're going under anesthesia, and your
Mm,
brain doesn't actually go through the natural sleep cycles that it does during regular sleep when you're not sedated. And so it might knock you out, but your quality of sleep is going to be terrible if you're on sleep medications. And so that, I think, should be the absolute last resort. Some supplements for sleep. Magnesium threonate is a really important one. That's one I think we talked about last time, magnesium threonate or glycinate. There's another one called L-theanine that's really good for sleep. GABA, which GABA, it stands for, oh my God, gamma aminobutyric acid, I believe. GABA, right? Not to be confused with gabapentin, which is a nerve pain medication, right? So GABA, a supplement. So that is a good one for sleep. Those three. I feel like there's another one that I'm forgetting. There is one called phosphatidylserine that is not primarily for sleep, but what it does is it helps to regulate our autonomic nervous system and helps our autonomic nervous system to switch from sympathetic, like fight or flight, active and ready, go, go, go mode, to parasympathetic, which is where our nervous system needs to be in order to sleep. And so phosphatidylserine is something that helps the nervous system do that. And so indirectly, that will help with sleep.
interesting.
So those, yeah, those are kind of the big ones that I'm thinking of. What am I missing? Am I missing any of the sleep supplements? Do you know of
I
any
think
others?
so. I did put, you had a good book resource that I put in the notes, chat notes here, Why We
Yes.
Sleep.
Yeah. Have
So
you read that?
I haven't read it, but
It's really good. Yeah,
stuff.
so Dr. Matthew Walker wrote a book called Why We Sleep, and he's a PhD sleep scientist, but the book is meant for regular people. So it's, I mean, it's sciency, but like it's understandable. That book changed my life, literally. Like, after the first year of my concussion, where I was literally suicidal because I could not sleep, and that was making every aspect of my being just messed up. I read that book, and there were maybe like 15 different strategies that he talks about for sleep hygiene, and it's things I hadn't heard of before. Not just like turn off your TV 2 hours before bed, right? We all know that.
Yeah.
But all of these things, I implemented them, and that did really help my sleep. So one of the main strategies that he talks about that I tell people, to do all the time, I do it myself, is every morning, as soon as you wake up, ideally before 9 a.m., ideally when the light is, fresh, go outside and get sunlight in your eyeballs. So this can't be done through a window. You don't want to wear sunglasses. You don't want to stare at the sun, but just be outside and let light get into your eyeballs first thing in the morning. And so that starts to regulate your brain's circadian rhythm. And then you do the same thing in the evening when the light is low, like sunset-ish, dusk time frame. You go back outside, let the light come into your eyes, and that helps your brain produce sleepy hormones, right? So that would be the number one thing I would recommend for sleep that everybody start doing right now.
I gotta
um,
get my husband to take his sunglasses off in the morning. Like, I tell him this and he's like, I'm outside. I'm like, you got to take your glasses off.
yeah.
It's only like 10 minutes or something. It's not a big, it's
Yeah,
not,
it's not, yeah. I mean, and even like 2 or 3 minutes is like beneficial, but yeah, ideally like 10 minutes, if it's cloudy, maybe 20. And then, the other thing that he talks about is during the day. If you're outside during the day, and it's full sun, like you don't have to, I mean, you can wear sunglasses, but it actually is good to take your sunglasses out for, 5 minutes or so in full sun, because again, that's a signal to your brain that like it is afternoon, and that helps reset our circadian clock, and that's going to help us regulate our sleep cycle. I do want to speak a little bit to melatonin, because that's something a lot of people know about, and that's something a lot of people take. Melatonin is a hormone, and that is not a good thing to mess with on a regular basis. The other thing is, there was a study recently, and a lot of people are probably familiar with this. It showed that reviewed a bunch of different melatonin supplements. It put all of them through this, third party ingredient testing. And what they found is that these supplements contained anywhere, and I'm going to botch these numbers, but like this is just, you get the idea, right? They contained anywhere from like 4% of the amount that it said it had to 420% of the amount that it said it had. Right. So, like, a lot of these supplements aren't regulated and they don't contain the amount they say they contain. And if you're taking something that has 420% of a hormone, like, that is no bueno. And so, like, melatonin is something that you really have to be careful with. And, like, I recommend, and my recommendation is coming from, learning from actual sleep scientists. Like, I am not a sleep scientist, but my recommendation is if you are going to take melatonin, get it from a reputable source, right? So that's a hard thing to do, but there's a company called Full Script that a lot of providers have access to. I have access to this. A lot of functional medicine providers have access to this, and they vet their supplements to make sure that they're high quality and they're actually containing the amounts that they contain. And you only want to take like 2 milligrams. Like all of these things you buy over the counter that's like 10 milligrams of melatonin. No, 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 no. Right? Like the normal amount is such a minuscule amount that you only want to take like 1 or 2 milligrams if you're taking it exogenously. And then you only want to take it to try to get your normal rhythm back. So, if I have done an ultra bikepacking race, which I don't do anymore, but I used to, right? Like you're doing an ultra bikepacking race and you're not sleeping and you're sleeping 2 hours a night and your circadian rhythm is super messed up. After that is a really good time to take melatonin for a couple of days just to help that rhythm regulate and then stop taking it. So it's not something that's meant to be taken every night.
Yeah.
Travis talks about THC sleep products, also a bad idea. THC has been shown to do similar things to as alcohol and sleep medication. So it acts as a sedative. And so it might knock you out, but it is going to impact the quality of your sleep. And alcohol, same thing. Even a tiny amount of alcohol, like I stopped drinking alcohol a few years ago. I drink on a very, very rare occasion, but when I do choose to have an alcoholic beer, I know that I'm choosing a night of subpar sleep because it sedates you and that might put you to sleep, but that does not do anything good for your cycle. I feel like I just went on a tirade. Do you?
Sleep is really important. It's when our brains are recovering. And
Yeah.
so it is like the place to spend some time. So thanks for that book. I'm going to get it for my
Mm-hmm.
husband. He
Yeah,
doesn't have
it's a good one.
ADHD, but he's been a chronic bad sleeper for most of his life. All right, there's quite a few questions that I'm not going to read individually, but I'll just kind of, because they're all a little bit similar. Let's see. One talks about how do you tell between neck and nerve and
Ooh,
concussion symptoms.
I love that one.
Yeah, that one was really interesting. So actually, let me find that specific one since you got really excited about it. But then there's other ones where I have left side weakness, or I still have this symptom, or I have balance issues, or I have sensitivity to light, or I have. So kind of we'll get to the nerve one, but I just want to let everyone know you're all asking questions in those 7 different areas of symptoms. And so that is your signal of that's the area. And if you go to the ebook, concussion ebook, it breaks those down a little bit, but that's the area where you need to find a therapist and spend your recovery time, because you're good in certain areas, but you still have those areas. So if you're having those symptoms, that's a great signal to tell you where you need to spend your therapy. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's quite a few questions of like, I still have this, I still have that,
Yep. Yep.
but
And a
you
lot of these.
personalize it.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these symptoms can be caused by different systems, right? So, like a headache is a very common symptom of concussion, and that can be caused by your neck. That can be caused by your visual system. That can be caused by anxiety and depression. That can be caused by autonomic nervous system dysfunction, right? So, all of these things can be involved. And if you're working with a skilled clinician, they can help you root out what the causes are of those and then start to address them.
Yeah, exactly. I felt that was a big revelation for me that like a headache can be coming from different things. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you might treat a headache with aspirin or treat it with, getting new eyeglasses when really it's your neck or really it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find that one question that was about, oh, here we go. I'm almost 2 years. This is from Graham. I'm almost 2 years post concussion, still dealing with issues. My question is how to distinguish between neck nerve issues versus concussion issues, if at all, and how to integrate treatments for both.
Right. So the key point there is if at all, right? If you have a concussion, you also have whiplash because the amount of force that it takes to produce a concussion is much higher than the amount of force it takes to produce whiplash. And so if you're having if you know you had a concussion, or even if you don't, I mean, you could not have a concussion and still have whiplash, and all of the symptoms overlap. It presents the exact same. So there are probably a lot of people out there that, think that they have a concussion, but it's actually whiplash. And so any concussion provider should look at your neck. And if they do not, find a different one.
Yeah, that's really eye-opening that anyone with a concussion had a neck
Mm-hmm.
injury,
Yep.
of
Mm-hmm.
some sort because of the force.
Yep, yep. And they can literally cause all of the same symptoms. And
Mm.
so there really is no way to differentiate between concussion and whiplash. I think there are maybe two symptoms that are not the same. I don't even know what they are. Like we don't even differentiate. Like all the symptoms are the same. We're going to treat them the same. All of the systems are the same. And here's it. So this is I got excited because we get to do a cool thing. I love doing this with people. I think I did this with you in our intake. So everybody put your fingertips on the back of your neck, right where your neck and your head meet. Okay? So put your fingertips right there. And then close your eyes and move your eyeballs from side to side. And you will feel those muscles of your neck underneath your fingertips moving. Okay?
That's
And
cool.
isn't it wild? Like, you don't even have to be moving your head. All you have to be doing is moving your eyes, and your neck muscles will activate. And so that is just a perfect example of how intricately tied the neck and the visual system are. And so visual symptoms can actually be because of your neck, and
Yeah.
neck symptoms can happen because of your visual system. So these two things really should be treated together pretty
Mhm.
much always.
Yeah. That's pretty enlightening, I'm gonna say. And then if you take it a step further, it's like, are you hunched over a computer and like
Mm-hmm.
getting your neck down all the time? And how's your pillow? And are you
Mm-hmm.
how's your posture, with your neck in the sort of other things that you're doing in your life?
Yeah, and when I take people through rehab processes, when we start visual rehab, I make sure that your neck is always in neutral. We're going to take your neck out of the equation when we start visual rehab, and then we're going to do neck rehab, the basics on its own. And then when we start to put them together, it's amazing how things start to crop up. Like I've got a client that can do a whole host of visual exercises with her neck in neutral and be just fine, but the second she turns her head even 20 degrees, everything falls apart, right? And so, that, like, as a clinician, like, that provides me with a lot of information. And so, that's just something that we have to think about when we're going through the rehab process. Like, we progress things in the visual system, and we need to regress things with the neck, right? So if you're doing difficult visual things, let's keep your neck in neutral. If we're going to do difficult neck things like being turned, let's back down the visual input and then gradually bring these two things up together.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. There's two questions about helmets.
Mhm.
Let's talk about helmets for a minute, which number one, helmets don't prevent concussion.
They do
Um,
not.
but they prevent death
They
and
do.
brain and, you know, traumatic brain
Right,
injury.
more severe
Yeah,
TBI.
they
Mhm.
definitely prevent, I think I would be dead if I hadn't been wearing a helmet,
Oh,
'cause
same. Yeah.
real pinpoint rock, sharp rock on a very specific point in my helmet. So,
Mhm.
helmets don't prevent concussions, but they they do prevent serious brain injury, and they can help mitigate the effects of hitting your
Mhm.
head or minimize the effects of hitting your head. And you want to choose, you want MIPS, you want the best helmets. MIPS is basically a rotational sort of in the technology of helmets. I happen to use Smith helmets, but a lot of companies use MIPS. And so
Mhm.
it's just a little higher level. Don't get a cheap helmet. And if you fall and hit your head and crack your helmet, get a new helmet. I think they say about 5 years is the lifespan of a helmet.
Is
Is
it
what
5 whole years?
maybe it's less, but you
Should
know,
know this. I feel like it's
I feel like I should know it too. I guess it depends on usage and it depends on, if it's sitting out in the sunlight, which hopefully
totally.
it and and
Yeah,
so
yeah. But yeah, but then like, sweat like breaks down the foam, and so yeah, I'm sure it totally depends on usage. I replace my helmet every year to 2 years. Just because I have a concussion history, right? Um but yeah, so the like you said, the MIPS, so like MIPS, for anybody that doesn't know, that's not a brand, like that's a technology that is in lots of different types of helmets. The way that I choose my helmets is I look at the Virginia Tech helmet ratings. And I think I put a link to that somewhere in here, Rebecca?
I can pull it up right now while you're talking. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So Virginia Tech, the university, they did this and are currently still doing this massive study on all sorts of sporting helmets, cycling included, but skiing, kayaking, all of these things. And like Rebecca said, it is true that helmets do not prevent concussions, but the ones that have more of a rotational and angular velocity control can mitigate the effects of them. And so Virginia Tech has studied these helmets and ranked them. There's like 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star. And basically they say that like any of the 5-star helmets are good. And if you want to, be really safe, you can get, so one of the top 5-star helmets or something like that. And so that is where that's, when people come to me and they're like, oh, what helmet should I get? I just drop that link and I say one of the 5-star helmets, doesn't matter which one, but one of these.
I put that in the chat down there. There's also a question about full face versus half shell helmets.
Yeah, doesn't matter
Yeah,
for
I mean, I think
concussion.
the same thing. A full face is gonna protect your face and jaw from trauma and
Mm-hmm.
impact, but it's not necessarily going to change your concussion outcome. Um, but it might save your life.
Right. So
So,
definitely wear a helmet because yeah, we would not be here if we did not have helmets when we had our crashes. So
I for sure wouldn't be here. Okay, so those are the two helmet questions. Let's see. All right, this one is another sort of similar symptom. Once you have a TBI, is there any way to correct balance issues? This comes from Renee. I can't explain it to people, so that's also part of this invisible injury. I have left side weakness. Things on my left side versus my right feel different. I'm unstable. This is hard to explain to anyone. I just had to teach myself how to jump. So
hmm
what area is she in these like symptom, what zone is she referring to based on
yeah, so could be any one or several of visual, vestibular, or neck for
okay,
balance issues. And
okay.
so our vestibular system is in our inner ear, and that effectively tells our head where it is in space and where our body is in space. And so when that gets disrupted, that can affect our balance in a huge way. Our visual system can also affect our balance in a lot of ways that I won't talk about because of the essence of time. And also our neck, like what the little exercise we just did to show how connected our neck is to our eyes. And also, our neck has like the second most proprioceptive fibers, muscle spindles in our body, second to our fingertips. And so our fingertips are like very sensitive, right? And our brain gets a lot of input from the things we touch with our fingertips. And the second most sensitive area is our neck, like right up by our head. And so neck input can have a huge impact on our balance. And so, I would go and work with a provider. Also, the somatosensory system can play a role. So the way that our brain is processing input from any of our senses, so like touch or even taste or smell or sight or sound, like our brain after a TBI can be dysfunctional in the way it processes these things. So I would go work with a clinician to help figure out like what of these systems are involved, and that will definitely help you with that balance.
Yeah.
Um, you have something to say about that?
No, I'm just going to let people know because we're coming up on time. We'll maybe take one more question, but I'm letting people know I'm dropping in the chat Liz's website with her concussion resources, and then I'm going to put mine down there as well so that when we're done here, you still have places to go for resources and
Yeah, thank
yeah.
you. I do want to take one more question, and I want to talk about the thing that that somebody asked us the first time around about like how can I'm looking at it right now. So how can I support, better communicate, and help someone with a TBI heal? My spouse's injury has drastically changed them and our relationship because they're easily irritable. I want to be supportive, understanding, and helpful. So like, this is for someone who is trying to support a loved one with concussion. So you want to take that one first?
I mean, we touched on it a little bit already. One, it's not easy. I mean, you're going through something really hard together that you don't understand. And so, I mean, communication on both levels is going to be important to sit and talk and say, I don't understand what you're going through. Help me understand. Trying to listen. The person who is suffering maybe won't tell you how to help. I didn't know how to ask people to help. I'd say navigating, probably the best thing you could do, in my opinion, what I wish that I had was for somebody like Liz or somebody to say, let me help you find the right care. Because I was just suffering and like trying to look on the internet to find care and find answers. And it hurt my head to look at a computer. And so I just felt really hopeless because I couldn't look for the help I needed. I couldn't find the help I needed. And I didn't know how to ask for the help I needed. And I didn't even recognize myself. And so, there was another question of what somebody asked, what do you wish you knew? Or how would you have liked to have been helped initially? I would have liked to have somebody like Liz or an expert in concussion be like, let me help you navigate your healthcare. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that was just exhausting. And I gave up, quite honestly. I couldn't find the right people and I gave up for a long time and just wallowed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
until I started, I sent up basically a white flag and was pretty down in the dumps. And then help started coming. And it first started coming in the way of therapy, of me just talking to somebody who wasn't a concussion specialist. And so I started talking to a therapist. And then I was able to talk to somebody who wasn't my spouse or wasn't my partner and kind of be like, this is what I'm feeling. Oh my God. Like, and that sort of came through an acupuncturist who recommended a therapist and then the snowball started coming of more people who were educated in this field. But my primary care physician was not the person to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And my spouse was not the person who knew how to help me either. So I I think helping them find the care they need, not be the care they need, but help them find the care they need, I think is a first step. And educating yourself, reading about concussions, going into the resources so that you can maybe understand what's going um, on the inside of this person, because it really is, it's a physical injury, but it's a really emotional injury. Like all injuries actually are, what do they say, what is it? Social psycho,
Somatic, yeah,
bio.
biopsychosocial. Mm-hmm.
Every
Yeah.
injury has a biological, a psychological, and a social aspect to it. And so depression is an injury. And so addressing the biological, how do you help them? The psychological, and then the social aspects, which is your family atmosphere and so all those areas need to be addressed. And it can't be the caregiver who does everything. It
Mm-hmm.
can be the caregiver who tries to find other people
Yeah.
to help. And I talked about it a little bit earlier. I sort of was estranged from a few friends who just didn't know how to help, and I didn't know how to ask for help. And so we went our ways. And then other people surfaced. So, but not to give up I know emotion, like you already said, emotion and is one of the first things to bubble up when you're not doing well. And so just knowing that alone, knowing that your partner or whoever, your friend lashes out, it's not really at you. It's because they're really struggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll kind of piggyback off that. Like, I think one of the questions that I would have for you is, does your partner realize how much that they're struggling with this concussion and how much it's affecting them? And I say that because long before my concussion, one of my best friends was engaged to somebody who got a concussion and absolutely changed her personality and inevitably ended up ruining their relationship, and they split up. And she was really mean to him, and she wasn't a mean person, but this was one of the effects of her concussion, is that she was really mean to him. And he didn't know how to help her because he saw that she was struggling with concussion stuff and she didn't realize that she was struggling with concussion stuff. And so, she thought he was a problem. He
Mm,
thought that she was a problem. This whole thing had ended up ending their relationship. And so, having seen that happen up close, like when my concussion happened, like he basically came to me and he was like, "Do not do this to Dan, who's my partner. Like, do not take this out on him. Like, know that you're messed up and deal with it proactively so that you don't ruin your relationship." And that was something that I really took to heart. And, because it was hard for him. Like, he didn't know how to help me. Same thing with you. Like, I didn't know how to tell him how to help me at the time. And I definitely recommend getting a therapist involved. Like, we went and saw a therapist who sat down with us to help us understand how best to deal with life after brain injury.
yeah.
And, and what one of the things that the therapist said is like, even if I can't articulate things that he can do to help me, like I can articulate things that are really hard for me. And
Hmm.
then we can decide what he is going to take off my plate. Right. So, like, making meals initially for me was really, really, really challenging. Like, making a sandwich would take literally 2 hours and then I would have to go to bed afterwards. Right. So, like, for the first, yeah, I don't even remember how many months, but the first quite a few months after my concussion, we just decided that he was going to make all the meals, and that's just the way it was because it was so much easier for him than it was for me, and that allowed me to take that stress off of myself and try to focus on my rehab. And
Yeah.
then, eventually we got to the point where I was healthy and stable enough that I needed to start doing those things again in little increments, right? And so I would start making like breakfast, and it would be really easy. It would be like pouring a bowl of granola and putting yogurt on it, but like it was getting back into those things really gradually so that both of us felt that I was a contributing partner again, because for a lot of that time early in my concussion in our relationship, it wasn't an equal partnership. It was a caregiver patient relationship, right? And like that's not healthy for the long term. And so it is important for the person who has a concussion to start practicing, doing these things again. And it's also important for the partner who's not concussed to understand that, you need to take some of these things off this person's plate. And the same thing goes with irritability. Like, it is important to understand, like, it's not you, it's the concussion. And at the same time, you have to have some boundaries, right?
Hmm.
Like, I don't know your situation. I don't know how irritable and angry this person gets, but like, you know, you don't want to tolerate being mistreated. And so if that's where the situation is getting to, and this person doesn't understand that this is a problem and this is happening because of the concussion and we need to solve it, like that's when you need to get a therapist involved. You need to have a come to Jesus talk. Like, this is not okay. I cannot go on being treated like this, right? Like, a concussion is not a reason to tolerate mistreatment. So, like, being understanding and accepting is important. And so is having boundaries around the way that you're treated.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's I mean, it's really important because yeah, no one's going through this alone. You're going through it with the people around you, and hopefully you don't burn all the bridges, um,
Mhm.
of the people that you care about because of an injury. Yeah. Well, we're at time. That was an amazing session. Thank you,
Yes. Thank
Doctor.
you.
Thank you
Thank
to all of
you.
you for your amazing questions. Part of our mission here is to help other people navigate more gracefully than perhaps we did. And I
Mhm.
so appreciate the education that you went and got to help more people. And so, for if we didn't get to your question, we're just going to keep churning through these, and again, there's tons of free resources on Liz's site and my site, and we'll just see where this goes. With our goal of trying to answer questions, I will remind you there's a community of people who have had brain injury, recovering from brain injury, who are in it, and it's a pretty strong supportive community. So get onto some of the social media links, or when you start talking to friends, are like, oh yeah, I've gone through that too, or I've gone through that too. And, build a little network around you. Because
Yeah.
we would love to be everything to all people, but we can't. So start building your support network as well. And you'll find a lot of people have had concussion, and people are willing to support you and talk to you about it and tell you their stories. And that's been actually one of the biggest helps for me, is just building that community.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for hanging out with us again.
All
Thanks,
right.
Rebecca.
We are going to stop this recording and we will post this online so you could share it with other people who might need to see it. We'll put it on my YouTube channel. And thanks again, everyone, for being here. Have a great evening.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.